Professor Owens.
Yes, hello.
Hello, Professor Owens.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good.
You remember me?
I remember you, of course. Yes. Hi.
Very nice to talk to you again. We are starting our
Hello, David. Welcome to our
Morning.
seminar. Thank
Mhm.
you for being with us. I follow your work, read your book, and there's a lot of what we teach here that's based on the frameworks that you built. So it's an honor, again, to have you with us. I was supposed to introduce you, giving a summary of your short bio, but I'd rather let you do it yourself. What we're gonna do is we're going to listen to you. So you're gonna do your presentation, and I'll do whatever you prefer. I can interrupt you in the middle of the presentation, maybe to do some conversation before you finish, or you can go all the way and then we're gonna have the conversation. I prepared a few questions for you, and then I'm gonna take questions from the audience as well.
Yeah, I would be happy to go as we go, just interrupt as we go and ask questions if you have them. Yeah.
Perfect. I think it's more interactive this way. Let's do it.
Exactly. Yes, agree.
Thank you so much. So I'm gonna leave it to you now.
Okay. Thank you. Let me, I have some slides that I want to use. I'll share those. Let's see, share. And get all of my screens in place so I can see what's going on here. Right. So, all right. Well, good morning, and thank you. Thanks for inviting me. This is exciting for me to be a part of this conference course here. Thank you, Anna, for inviting me and for remembering me from long ago. I have been to Brazil. I love Brazil. I always think I should have been born there. Unfortunately, I was born in another country, but I love Brazil and I love going there. So this is really an honor for me. So what I wanted to talk about with you all, and I shared some material, is this way of thinking about innovation that I have been working on for a long time, and I sent out some of you have the paper, some of you will be able to talk through it as a chapter for my book about this. But basically, it looks at innovation in a different way. First, let me introduce myself. So my name is David Owens. I am the professor at Vanderbilt University. I have appointments in lots of areas in medicine, in education, in business, in engineering, largely not because I know so much about those areas, but because those are places where there's a lot of need for innovation and a lot of problems with innovation. And so especially in medicine and especially in education, it becomes very problematic. So I show you this just as because the story is basically sort of starts at the bottom. I was an engineer at the San Francisco airport. My goal in life was to make stuff at the time it was to build stereos, audio, sound things. And so I did an electrical engineering degree, and I began to work as an engineer. As I moved into management a little bit, I realized the problems that were difficult, the most difficult problems were not the problems of technology, because with atoms and electrons, you can make predictions about their behavior and they are correct. With people, can't make any predictions about people. And so it became interesting to me that it was very difficult for us to think about and talk about innovation, about new possibilities, about how things might be different or might be better without taking into account how people are. And so for me, I did not realize that you could study people. I mean, I had heard of psychology, but I didn't know what that meant. I didn't realize you could study people. And so I began to basically went back to school, left the industry, went back to school, and did a PhD studying the organizational behavior of innovation and design and new product development, all of those kind of areas. And so that's what I studied, the people doing innovation, doing product development. And so that's what I want to talk about with you all, talk about what some of the issues are around that. So I guess one question is, I'm often asked, how do you create a culture of innovation? My job right now, I'm the director of the Campus Innovation Center, and our job is to help the university with innovation problems. And I'm often asked, like, in my department in finance or in my department in engineering, how do I help create a culture of innovation? How do I do that thing? I want to be more innovative. How do I help my people become that? And what I often have to answer is that you don't. That's not something that you can do if you want to become more innovative. And one of the problems is why we can't do that is because, this rule of it's not like a universal rule of gravitation. It's like, gravity. Creative people must be stopped. The idea is if you have an idea, and you just go to someone and say, I have this great idea, this should be, good for you, you will love this idea. They don't want your idea. And it is sad in some ways because we're often told in our culture that, creativity is good, ideas are a good thing. It's the best people who have these ideas. But in fact, most people, most of the time, pretty much all people, most of the time, do not want creative ideas. What they want is a problem solved, but they don't want creativity. And so for me, this insight, so this became sort of my first law of the first law of innovation, is that creative people must be stopped, is the idea that there are lots of ways of stopping people, and we want to think about, what are those ways? The first step is to define innovation. And often for many years when I would teach, I would ask the participants to say, hey, how do you define innovation? And for a lot of people, creativity, innovation, they have not thought about it very much. It's just a term that you use to mean something new, something creative, but they really have never sort of sat down and actually said, okay, what is the definition of that thing? Because we know that creating definitions creates power, creates explanatory power. And just like the same way frameworks will help you explain what's going on in a situation, in the same way language helps us explain what is going on. And so innovation for me, that was the first order, is to define it, because then we have to say, do we have this thing or do we not? And so what I've come up with is really thinking about innovation as a set of conditions that are satisfied. Innovation involves creativity. that is, something new, an idea that comes out, generation, genesis. Innovation requires execution, because creativity alone doesn't change anything in the world. It's the execution of that creativity that creates something. But the execution is also not enough, because you can execute, but it doesn't change anything. And that's where adoption comes in. So adoption is the thing where if someone says that innovation, that creative idea you have that you've executed on, I will bring that into my life. Like, that is something I care about. That is something I will change my life around your idea. And that's where we have innovation. And so when I was showing this slide here, creative people must be stopped. It's because it's only creative, because it hasn't actually solved some problem that people care about. It hasn't done the execution, it hasn't done the adoption, which all is the things that lead to innovation. And so in my thinking about it, I came up with this constraint framework. The reason I thought of it this way was I was working as a product designer in a company. We were consultants to other companies. I did a lot of work for Apple. I did a lot of work on laptops. So they have the laptop and then it gets hot inside. They want to move energy around. They want to do different things. And so my company was very good at figuring out what the client wanted and helping them make the new things. So we were always working on new things, help them make the new things in a way that would be possibly successful. And it only occurred to me after I had time to sort of step back and think about it, because often when you're in a job, it's really difficult to think, right? Because you're so busy doing the job. But when I had a chance to step back and look at what I had been doing, I realized that when our company was very successful was when we knew what the constraints were. We knew what the conditions of success were. When our company was really unsuccessful was when a client company would come to us and say, we want you to design something for us, and we want it to be so creative and so innovative. We would say, what do you want? Like, should it be? Should it be, something in your hand, something? They say, oh, no, we don't want to tell you, just make it creative. And that's the terrible thing, because we don't know, what their market is, what their brand equity is, how they have production, what does their supply chain look like, all of those things. And so as a company, we had this intuitive way of asking the questions around things, like if you're going to make this thing, like, how many batteries does it need? Do you have manufacturing capacity? How do your customers think about your current products? And those, for me, at the time, were just our practice. But as I step back from it and I look at it, I say, oh, wait a minute, those are us figuring out what are the constraints, what are the conditions of success for this new thing that we're making. Then the question for me was, how do I generalize that? How can I make it so that any innovation problem, you can tell me what are all the constraints, what are all the conditions of success for that thing? And so that for me was the general, the universal law of constraints. Like, what are the basic constraints I could come up with to define any innovation problem? And so I came up with these 6, and these 6 really are from, it's sort of there are many, many, many more. In terms of categories, was an easy way for me to organize my thinking, but also organize my explaining of these things. So the 6 constraints, or the 6 conditions of success, are first, that you must have a good idea. And so a constraint is when you don't have good ideas, it's really difficult to get to a new innovation place. So that's the first condition. Second condition has around taking risks. If you're unwilling to take risks, that is, if you're unwilling to change or to try change, then you're not going to get to a new innovation. So that was sort of the second barrier. Third one was, we have a good idea, we're willing to change, but we cannot execute it. We don't know how to do it. If I make computer chips, that does not mean I can make potato chips, right? Or vice versa. I need to have an execution capability to be able to do that thing. But execution is not enough. I also need to be able to, address a market, user needs. I can make something, and if no one needs it or wants it, it's not going to be a success. It's not going to drive adoption. There's another part of this, which was around aspirations, and I'll talk about that a little bit more detail in a few minutes. But basically, the social, or the almost like the ethics, the anthropology of society, and what we want and what we think. And then finally, I sort of talk about the technical part, which is interesting because that's where I started as an engineer. I started with the technical part, and most engineers think innovations are not successful because the technology doesn't work, when in fact, I think it's more of these other things, but it still has to work. In the end, the technology has to function. And so for me, one thing to point out here is that these are organized by level of analysis. So for academics, I was an engineer. That's sort of one field of academia. That's the technology part. I studied as a social psychologist. So I studied the psychology of groups. Generating ideas is something we do as an individual. Risk-taking is something we do in groups. And those are very different ways of looking at the same problem. And so as I was playing with this, I realized, like, wait a minute, people who are psychologists really believe that the generating ideas is the most important thing. And if you read psychology books on innovation, all they talk about is how do you have better ideas? How do you generate ideas? How do you do analogic thinking? How do you do, problem solving strategies? On the other hand, if you talk about the needs and markets, for example, at this level down here, that's the level of the economists. And economists don't talk about that. They don't talk about what goes on inside of a person's head. They talk about markets, and they talk about rivals, and they talk about firms. It's a firm level analysis. And until I realized that, I was very confused, because you'd read one book on innovation, it would say, oh, just have better ideas. And you read another book on innovation and say, oh, disruptive technology. It's like, well, which one is it? And that was my problem. And so what I put together was, for me, what was sort of a review piece, a review article book on innovation and how different people think about it. So I'll share some of that now. What required was me to reframe innovation. And so we say, and so this is the same stuff I just showed you in a list, but just visually to give you a sense that in order for innovation to happen, you have to have an idea. And there are ideas you can have, and there are ideas you cannot have. And the ideas you cannot have are because you don't have the thinking capability, you don't have the information, you don't have the data, you don't have all sorts of ways of generating ideas you can. But there are ideas you can generate. So you take those ideas, and remember, this is the creative part, is not enough. You have to actually go through the rest of the steps. So now I have to find support for my ideas. And so when I have an idea, first thing I do is I run out in the hallway and say, hey, Joe, do you have any money? Like, I have this idea. Or, hey, what do you think about this project? Now, the things I can get support for are different than the ideas I can have, because I can't get support for everything I know, because they have a different perspective. They look at it from a different way. So I have the individual, and then I have the group. So that's the level of analysis. Then what I do is I say, well, okay, if we have this idea and we want to move it forward, I need to execute that idea. And so I need an organization. And all an organization is, the way I define organization is, an organization is the mechanism to execute an idea. And so if I want to execute this idea, I build this set of relationships between people, between resources, between all the things that organizational OD, organizational development, organizational theory people think about, and say, okay, here's how we can execute. Now, I can't execute everything I can get support for, and I can't get support for everything I can think. And so you can see this area is getting smaller and smaller. Now I need a market. Someone has to say, I want that. I would change my life for that. I will buy that. It's smaller. I have to get societal acceptance, because society has a thing called regulation. And sometimes the things that I can make, people want to buy it, but it's not legal, for example, like illegal drugs, heroin, right? It's something that there's a market for it, but it's not something that's socially acceptable. And so those kinds of changes that are not socially acceptable are very difficult to get across. Even if society doesn't want to itself adopt, it can stop other people from adopting. And so your innovation doesn't move forward. And then finally, it has to work. If I get all this stuff done, and if it doesn't work, then no one's going to adopt also. And so in this way, I sort of think about what are the things that have to be true in order for innovation to occur? And the punchline for the joke is, they all have to be true. All of these things have to be true. But some of them are so, some of the conditions are very easy to satisfy, and some of the conditions are very difficult to satisfy, depending on the problem that you're trying to solve. And so the way I've drawn this picture, it looks like the functioning technology is the difficult piece, right? Because it seems to sort of close off the most space. If I were talking about a different kind of technology, then a different kind of innovation, it might be the social acceptance that's more difficult. So we all, and maybe I'll show a picture of a Segway, this device with two wheels, and you ride around, and then tourists use them. That's a device that it functioned, it has everything else, but it didn't have societal acceptance, because people thought you looked weird if you drove one, and it was too fast to drive on the street, on the sidewalk, but too slow to drive on the street. And so society had these attitudes about this innovation that caused it to not happen. The other thing to point out on this picture is the problem of think outside the box. So when we tell people, hey, think outside the box, and this is when the clients would tell us, my company, think outside the box, it was terrible because they would say, well, think way off over here. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but if you say, think off way over here, or think way over there. When you think in places where you're not satisfying constraints, that's a problem, right? Because you're not satisfying the constraints. You're not actually making the conditions such that the innovation can succeed. So that's sort of the basic model, and that's sort of the basic way I look at it. And what I do spend time in my courses doing is trying to have people in the book, trying to have people look at the problem they're trying to solve and then understand, what does this picture look like for that problem? And so if I'm trying to solve the problem of a new handheld device, that's one thing. If I'm trying to solve the problem of how do we change education, I draw a different picture of this. And what it helps me do is helps me realize, okay, what is the problem? What is the most critical problem that if I cannot solve that, if I cannot satisfy that condition, I should stop, right? Because some problems we can't solve now with our current technology, with our current attitudes, with our current things. And so maybe we should just put them aside, work on something else until some time goes by or technology develops, then we can work on it again. But we need to know that up front. We need to know that the direction that we're working may not be feasible at this time. So is that, well, hopefully that makes sense, and ask any questions if it does, if it doesn't. Anything?
For me, it makes total sense. I'll probably just drop you a question about this framework. First, related to the people dimension, we can, I would be summarizing this question related to individuals and the group support. So trying to combine the analysis more of a people perspective.
Yeah.
And do you think that a little bit of conflict, because I understand you need group support to do innovation, but at the same time, for ideas to come up and change to be embraced by the group, a little bit of conflict is necessary, right? Because if everybody wouldn't say, oh, there's a problem on how we're doing things, or we need to change. For me, there's an interesting fact about how people work together. Are they all friends? Everything is perfect. Margins and the profitability of the company is so high. So for me, that type of environment is unless likely to foster innovation. But at the same time, if there's a lot of conflict, I would say there's no way that he's going to make it happen, right? Because people are very competitive. So in your opinion, and I know that this is a hard thing to answer because there's no exact answer. But what's the level of conflict that would be the ideal way of fostering innovation?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And so I have colleagues who study conflict, especially conflict in groups. And one thing they talk about is that there's at least 3 kinds of conflict. One kind is called process conflict. What do we do first? What do we do second? What do we do third? And we can have conflict around, well, no, I think we should do step B first, but then do step C later. And the understanding is that what you want is to have a lot of conflict around process first, but then you want that conflict to be resolved and stop. Because we're all going to do the same thing now, we're going to do the same thing now, we're going to do the same thing now, right? And so that helps our process. The second kind of conflict they talk about is task conflict. And task conflict is if you and I are arguing, we're building a nuclear power plant and we have to say, how thick should we make the wall, to keep the nuclear material in? And I say 3 inches and you say 4 inches. Well, it sort of matters. And we want to fight about that, right? We want to have a good argument about that. And that task conflict is I say 3 and you say 4, and I say, well, maybe 3.5 and you say 3.25, right? And we sort of figure out, because there is a a better answer, and I use my approach to the answering the problem, you use your approach to answer the problem, which is why there's conflict, because we have different approaches. And when we can resolve that about the task, that's a good thing. And so we call that basically information processing. And so you want the group to do information processing, and that looks like conflict. What we typically call conflict is the third kind of conflict, which they call relationship conflict. And relationship conflict is I say 3 and you say 4. I say, well, how come you showed up late to the meeting? And you say, well, you always talk too much during the meeting. And then it becomes personal, right? It's sort of a relationship problem. It's not solving a problem of how thick to make the wall. It's now an interpersonal problem. And that kind of conflict you don't want. But problem is that people are not good. The task conflict slides into relationship conflict. And sometimes we don't recognize that that's happening. And we don't stop the group from saying, hey, wait a minute, like that's getting personal. We need to stay in the task conflict. And most people are afraid of relationship conflict. And so they avoid all conflict. But then you don't have the task conflict, which is what you need. And so I think the way I've been thinking about it is, and what I do here in our center is we have facilitators whose job is to watch for this. His job is to say, there's not enough conflict. He said 3, you said 4, like, what is the answer? And then when it says, okay, we don't need the relationship conflict, like you guys seem to be like, let's take a break. Like you go off here, you go here, let's have some coffee, let's, shake hands, and then we'll come back together. And so the facilitator plays a very important role, I think, in managing the conflict. And sometimes the leader of the organization or the leader of the group can do that as well. But it's really difficult to do because we have so much experience with conflict going out of control as humans living our lives that we are often afraid of it. And again, if you don't have conflict arises when things get very specific. If I say, our company, we need to save money, all of you will say, yes, we need to save money. I say, well, we need to save money by firing you. It's like, no. And so when things get very specific about how we will do something, that's when the conflict arises. And that's the job of the leader of the group, is to make sure that you are at a level where that's happening.
Thank you. I'll make just one more comment related to your answer, but here at Insper, and we are trying to approach a little bit of critical thinking as a way of fostering this dynamic amongst people that are working on innovation based on your track, what happened in your life, your perspectives of life, your biases, and so whenever you make a group that people have different histories, it's it's a good way of bringing new perspectives to the innovation process. This way, and I totally agree with you. If you don't take it personal, if you try to use your differences in a way to bring new perspectives to the innovation process, it works, but you can't make it personal. So you have to accept differences.
Yes, that's why we believe there's positive returns, that is positive value to having diversity in a group if you have good process, right? Because the process is what you're talking about. The process allows you to have the conflict. Well, it's not only conflict, but allows you to do the information processing in a way that doesn't have emotional byproducts or emotional, junk that makes the functioning stop. And so, yeah, that is absolutely the case. And so yes.
Okay, maybe we can go on, and then I'll open to the group to make more questions.
Yeah. Okay, good. So basically what I would normally do is step through, but I just wanted to pull up a couple of things just to show. So this idea of having better ideas, what I do then in my framework is to go in each of the 6 in a little bit more detail and talk about what are the issues. So for example, for the individual, and this one I find a lot of people sort of forget that they have an obligation when innovation is concerned. So what is my role in innovation? Many people think like, well, that's R&D, or someone else has to, that there's a creative person, let them do the innovation. But in fact, I think we need to think about for ourselves, because if innovation starts with ideas, where do ideas come from? They come from people, right? So they come from us having this thing. And to have ideas, you need new perception, new data, because any ideas we have is based on the things that we have inside. You need an election, which is just really called problem-solving strategies or thinking, ways of thinking, strategies for thinking. And so you need new data, you need to think about it differently, and then you need to express it. And that's something we sometimes forget, is that when we express our ideas, it's often difficult for us to know what we're trying to say, because we've all had the experience where, you're sleeping at night and you have a dream, and it solves all the problems, and you wake up and you can't write it down, like you can't, because the expression is difficult. And so we know people who are very articulate. Einstein was someone who was very articulate. He wrote down something, and other people looked at it and said, that makes a lot of sense. The same with Leonardo da Vinci. He had lots and lots of ways of articulating, of expressing his ideas so that people could look at them and say, I agree with that or I disagree with that. But in either case, I understand your idea. If I don't understand your idea, I have to reject it, right? Because it's irrational for me to say, oh, you have this idea, I don't understand it. Yes, I will do that. It's like, people don't do that. People say, I don't understand it, no. And so we have to do the work ourselves of making sure that our ideas, that we understand them, but then also that we meet people where their understanding is, so that we can make the idea happen. And so when we say creative people must be stopped, it's because sometimes we think, oh, because I had an idea and because I understand it, that means it's a good idea. When it's not a good idea unless you also agree it's a good idea. And so there's this communication part that happens there. And so there's a whole, there's 50, 75 years of people who do research in this exact kind of stuff. And I find it very interesting. And I'll just show you, I think we'll see if this is able to play. I just have a little piece of video I want to share. Let me know if it's able to work for you. Okay, so let me just pause for a second. So what happens is this man with the reddish coat on has it's an experiment, a social psychology experiment. So this man over on your left side has walked up to the man with white hair and said, can you give me directions to a place? And he's saying, where's the directions? The man says, oh, it's over there. You have to walk down here, you go. He's explaining where the directions are. And then what happens, oops, let me go back, sorry. Okay, so then what happens is, as they're working, two people come by carrying a door. So you see what's happens is that the person he's giving instructions to changes into someone else. So this is a different person than the person who said, where are the directions? And then what happens is the man just goes on and says, okay, well, now let me keep giving you directions. Let me keep giving you directions. He does not recognize that there's a new person that he's talking to, which is kind of strange, right? That the person you're talking to turns into someone else and you just keep going, you keep going. And so what happens is in this, the man doesn't notice, keeps giving instructions, keeps going ahead. And this man doesn't notice either. And it's kind of interesting. And so what we recognize is that, let me just click the next slide. 50, there it is. 50% of the people in the study did not notice that there was a different person there. And so then the question is like, why not? If you're going to innovate, you need to innovate in response to some kind of change or opportunity in the environment. How do you recognize that environment? How do you recognize that need to change? You recognize the need to change because something has changed out there. And so you have an opportunity to innovate, or you have a response you have to give to that. But if we're so poor at recognizing that something has changed, how do we know that we need to innovate? And so when I ask, participants, why did we not notice that this person turned into that person? And they say, well, the gentleman giving instructions was very busy. Cognitively, his brain was completely engaged. Giving directions is a very difficult task, actually, because you have to do shapes, you have to do talking, you have to do eye contact, you have to do, does he know when I say left at the McDonald's, what that means, right? So you're doing all this work, and they say, well, like he's busy. Then I say to you, do you ever get busy? Do you ever get this busy where you don't see new information, where you don't bring in new data? And that's one of the problems of innovation, is that we get so busy that we don't see an opportunity, or we don't see that something has changed that we need to respond to. And so that's why, for example, taxis did not think of Uber, because they're so busy driving people around and making money. And that's why hotels didn't recognize the Airbnb, because they're so busy, doing their thing. They're so busy that they don't realize, like, oh wait, there's an opportunity here. There's a need that we're not meeting in some way. And so for me, like that, I find that pretty interesting that, that it is sort of it starts with us recognizing what goes on in the world and saying, is there an opportunity here for something different to take place? And sometimes the answer is no. Like, we don't always need innovation. So I do some work with a company in Tennessee. They run all the nuclear power plants. So, the nuclear energy plants. And when I do innovation with them, I'm saying, we don't want innovation. Don't do anything innovative. Like, all I want is turn the light on, electricity, no electricity, electricity, no electricity. That's all we want. We don't want people getting creative. We don't want people getting crazy in that way. And so I think we don't always need innovation, but when we do, it's in response to some kind of change. And so how do we recognize that change? So anyway, so I'll leave it with that there's this problem where sometimes we don't see the need, even though we know we need to change.
That's really interesting. Let me make a comment about this. Yesterday, we were talking about what would be the enablers, but not the constraints, right? You started with the constraints. And I remember making a comment about environment, right? What's the environment? There are some cases that you don't have an environmental pressure to innovate, right? Everything is very stable, and so this will change depending on the company reality, right?
Yes,
on the business you are. It's why will you be fostering innovation everywhere in a company that should be more stable because of the market they're competing at, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
So part of it is then recognizing it, and the constraint there is inside of us. But then the other part is acting on it. Then the constraint becomes your organization or your group that is unable to respond. And so if someone says, wait a minute, I see something. I see that, people are wanting to sleep in other people's beds when they're not home. And everyone in the company is like, oh, go away. We're talking about something important here. And meanwhile, you had the idea for Airbnb, but you were unable because of the way that you have communications, or because of the imperatives, the strategy of the organization defines away the thing that you see as being a possibility. And so we have the constraint inside, but then we also have the constraint outside, where we have to get people to act on what we see. And that's why the communication part, the articulation of your idea, is so very important. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Are you following with your presentation, or are you finished?
I think that's enough. I can talk for hours.
Me too.
and I won't do that to you. But what I will do, let me just see if I have a last. So let me just put up no, I think that's enough. I think that's enough for right now. That the basic framework is out there, and that there's a internal set of constraints, but then there's an external set of constraints. And I think that's a good place for us to have a more discussion about it.
So let's explore a little bit of. I'll start with the question, and then I'll probably get one or two questions from the group that's here with us as well. Let's explore a little bit about the organizational perspective. We started that with my last question, because there's a reality that is ongoing in each organization, right? How is it designed, and what's the business they're competing on? And so what's your vision about an established organization being able to do innovation completely out of the box, something that is very ambitious and transformational for their own business?
Yeah, great question. So I think let's see, let me just put a slide up because I think this answers some of it, which is the, this one right here. So so one way to think about this is in the way I've been thinking about it is that what the constraints of organization. So the organization is a design at time one that's designed to solve a problem at time two, right? So we design the organization and then we act. And so time one is we design with an idea of what should happen and then we act. And some organizations, when we build them with a structure, that's the relationships, a strategy, what are we trying to do, and then a set of resources. And that's really sort of a simple way of thinking about organizations. So this thing called a university, for example, so you think about a university, this organizational form is over 1,000 years old. So organizations called universities, the University of Bologna has existed since 1088. Same thing, wear the funny hats and wear all the things that makes for an organization. So this organization is very robust because as a form, it has lasted for 1,000 years. That's longer than pretty much all the different monarchies and all the different, the different even governmental agencies. And so the first question would be, why change it if it works? If it's been good for 1,000 years, why isn't it good for another 1,000 years? And then if you're going to change it, like what would stop you? And so that's where you have to say, well, what are the structural issues and what are the strategy and how do those things work? So then I go to this page here, which is this cartoon I once saw that was first, what I thought was kind of funny, but it goes directly to the question you're asking about the kind of radical changes, possibly the kind of very big changes. So if you think about Amazon, what does Amazon do? Amazon's a big machine, and they pick something up here and they drop it off here. So their strategy is distribution, right? I get it here, carry it here, give it off. Basically what they do. And since it's a big machine and it is very hierarchical, the kind of changes that you can make in Amazon tend to be small changes. Like, okay, should the driver make this many turns or that many turns? Should we have this color be yellow or be red? And because they can't disrupt the system, because the system is working and they don't want to disrupt it, they want it to work. And so the changes they make are small. Google, on the other hand, is like this crazy place where they do all kinds of crazy stuff. And the problem with Google is that when they do something really innovative, then they forget they did it and then they go do something else. So remember Google Glass? They had these glasses that would let you have a computer in your eyeball and do kind of things. And then they stopped making it. It's like, well, why did you stop? That thing worked. And for Google, radical innovation is the answer to every problem. For Amazon, it's very adaptive innovation. So explore, exploit. Google explore, Apple exploit. And so really required. Amazon, Apple, same thing. What Apple does is they take things that are sort of I call it half-assed. They sort of don't work very well, and they make it awesome. So the MP3 player, the very first MP3 players were, it was okay. It was radical, but it was okay. But when it became the iPod, it was awesome. And so for Apple, they do a very specific kind of innovation. So what I would say is that depending on your organization and depending on your strategy as an organization, a different kind of innovation will be appropriate or be possible even inside. And so the thing you don't want to do is you don't want to join Amazon thinking, I'm going to bring in a bunch of Google ideas, because that system will not be able to tolerate it. The system will not work. You will always lose against the system. And so also you don't want to be making a lot of Amazon ideas inside of Google, because people will say, why are you so boring? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, can't you think? Because for them, the radical ideas is it. And so the trick to take into your organization is to say, for the problem I'm solving, does it require a radical solution or an adaptive? I use radical adaptive as the two, exploration or an exploitation, a solution. And then, and which is tolerable to my organization. Because sometimes solving the problem 50% is better than not solving it at all. You come in with a radical idea that could solve it, but it gets rejected, so you have zero change. You have an idea that is 50% solution, but it can be accepted. At least you get some change. So that's how I would think about that, to say, what kind of innovation am I seeking, and making sure that we have an understanding in the organization. This is the kind of thing we're trying to do. We have to break something in order to move forward, or nope, just a 1% difference is very good. Other questions? That's good. Thank you.
Really good. Now I want to take maybe questions from the audience. I don't know if anybody in the audience have a question. Yeah. Um, I'll give you the mic. I think no. Okay.
We have to present ourselves before?
No. You can go straight with the question.
Okay. Hi, David.
Hi.
I would like to ask you, as you are a professional at a university, I would like to ask how you see how university and companies can interact in a way to change the culture. How can a university change a company culture and a company can change a university? About the technological solution of problems, you have university company relationships and projects, R&D projects and things like this. But I would like to know about the culture as a psychologist, how you see interaction going and how can we work together to have more interaction, and because one is the source of the individual ideas and great ideas, and the other one's the one that want to solve the problem and adopt the technology. So it's a long path sometimes between basic research and the adoption of the technology. I'd like to know how is your experience with that and how can we help each other to understand both worlds?
Great. Great. Yeah, that's a great question. That's I really and that's the problem I'm living right now. So I run the Campus Innovation Center. We as a university, the strategy of Vanderbilt has been to, and I've been here maybe 20 years. When I first came, we were ranked like number 40, 45, somewhere in there, sort of low ranking, and now we're up to number 13 nationally. And the way we did that as a university, so our strategy was to become a proper university. Like, what does a real university do? It gets research grants, it has researchers, it has equipment, it has, people with PhDs, it has journal articles and papers being written, it has all of those things. And so it's gotten us to a certain point, but the problem is that if you only do that, you are doing knowledge generation, but you're not doing knowledge, transformation into practice or commercialization. And so we've been very good at that, but we've become it's become a custom, it's become a culture, it's become a way of doing things. And so now the Campus Innovation Center, we're asked to say, help us move the knowledge from the lab into the world. And so we say, okay, we want to do this. And we say, hey, do you want to help? Everyone's like, yes. And I say, well, you have to not write another paper. It's like, oh, no. Because the things that our incentive system is such that as an academic, if you write a paper, you get credits. If you start a company, people say, well, you're just greedy. You're making money for yourself. You're not making the world a better place. And so partly is those attitudes. I think the attitudes need to change. And so what we've been working on is trying to, one is hire different kinds of faculty. So faculty for whom seeing their work in the world is the most important thing. This happens a lot in medicine. And so if someone figures something out in medicine and they want to help more patients, that's an easy sell to get them to want to say, don't write another paper, we'll help you move it out. The other is bringing the kinds of resources and allowing people to spend money in a way that they weren't before. If you want to get funding from the federal government, from the national government, you have to apply for the grant. It has to be everything has to be very proper and very in place and very traditional in order for you to receive that grant. We are trying to have money inside the university where we can give people money and they say, I'm trying this new thing. I say, okay, that you've said enough, here's some money. Not where you have to show me this and what's the outcome and how many people and what's your R squared and what's your, right, those kind of things. And so that's another one. Going the other way, I think a lot of in our area here, to speak from my own experience, companies, we have the headquarters of Nissan USA is here in Nashville. I was there yesterday talking with them. And in many ways, they're like, well, what does the university have? You just write a bunch of papers. Like we have real problems. Like, we have a machine that broke. Like that's not how you study the boundary effects of a black hole in outer space, right? We have a real problem. And so I think in some ways what companies can do is begin to reach inside and recognize and help people doing the research understand that if you your research looks like this. If you move it just a little bit, it could solve a real problem that we have. And so that way you create a demand for things, but it requires the companies also to say, yeah, the things that people do in universities has value. It's not ready yet to implement, but I can work with them to help them get it to a place. Because sometimes as researchers, when we work on things, we want to change the world. We want someone to want this thing. But because of the attitude of us towards them and them towards us, we're unable to sort of make the transition across there. And so I think a lot of it is really the kinds of attitudes. But what I see is the impediments are that picture of the university 1,000 years old doing things a certain way, and it's difficult to change. And so I work with our chancellor, so our highest level, our chief officer of the university. I also work with the board president. So the way we're structured, we're a nonprofit. We have a board that hires a chancellor, and then everything goes below that. And so I work with those two people up here that we can drive change from the top. Because if it's not coming from the top, it's not going to happen. But even if it comes from the top, it doesn't mean it has to happen. So we also have to do bottom up. So we work a lot with students. We work a lot with graduate students who do a lot of the work. The faculty do some of the work, but the graduate students do a lot of the work, and we prepare them for jobs. And that's the way that the university can affect what happens, by having a student who's been trained, MBA, PhD, and have them go and join a company and drive this innovation change. But you've put your finger on something very, very difficult and very important with that.
I'll make a comment about this. I think that the university also can be a vector for helping companies to see change, right? How can we prepare people to be more aware of change? You showed that video that 50% of the people didn't see change because sometimes they're so busy, right? And I think that we can offer an environment where people can just get outside of the company and maybe take a week for a program where they can meet other people, do something different, take time to rethink the way the company is functioning. And the other way we are also working with an innovation hub here at the school, and we developed what we call thinking labs. And this way we take the top management of the company and we put people here in a way that they can think about how culture could be changed in a way to accommodate more innovation. I think that's another way of maybe connecting companies with university in order to foster change.
That's great. That's really interesting to hear, the thinking labs. I think that's a really great idea. And part of what when I went to Nissan yesterday, was trying to say, we need to have some mechanism to get our people and your people to move back and forth. And I love the idea of taking them off site, putting them in a different environment and having them think different. But also that's what everyone in this room is doing, right? That you are all people who have jobs, who work, and you are coming to a different place to experience something different, and you'll go back with your ideas. And the trick is, how do I make my ideas compelling when I get back? So people don't say, oh God, he's been in a program, he's gonna have all these dumb ideas. Like, why isn't he working? And so how do you come back with your ideas and say, no, this was really relevant to what we do as a business?
Really good. Let me see if there's another question in the room. Anybody else? One more, yeah.
Hello, I have a question about intra entrepreneurship programs inside the big corps. For me, it's a kind of program that you can change culture, but I think it's not related with open innovation. So sometimes you have a program for internal employees, and you also have the Open Innovation Program, and they are not related. So for me, it seems like there are two programs and two different ways to do innovation. And the Intra program is sometimes not considered the capacitation of the people and how we can get some key results, the KPIs. So I would like you to answer with your thoughts about those different programs that we can have different innovation KPIs and culture generated by them.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. So that's really a good observation of the entrepreneurship versus the open innovation. So one thing I'm seeing as I think about that is that with the entrepreneurship, we're using people who have, we call day jobs. Like you have a job, but you're also doing this entrepreneurship thing. You're trying to push something through. And if your organization is very execution focused, it's like, well, why isn't she doing the thing to help us execute? Why is she thinking about this entrepreneurship? Why is she thinking about this other stuff? She's not helping us move forward. And so that becomes something of a constraint. On the other hand, the open innovation is very not threatening. It's people who don't, who aren't trying to help me do my everyday work. And so I'm sort of less problematic. The open innovation, the way I see it, the open innovation has the problem where they don't see the internal constraints. And so I can have ideas for your company, but I don't understand how your company actually does what it does. And there's a lot of context knowledge that has to be in place in order for me to understand how to have a good idea for you. Entrepreneurship, I have a lot of context knowledge, but that stops me from seeing all this crazy stuff that open innovation might see. And so there's maybe the tension is of what kind of problem are you trying to solve? To say, okay, are we trying to solve problems of 100% growth, or are we trying to solve problems of 5% growth? And maybe the entrepreneurship is sort of more towards the 5% growth, and the open innovation is more towards the 100% growth. But I think also making it clear organizationally that you need ideas to come from the inside and from the outside. And that there's things happening in the world that you need to be aware of, and the open innovation is the way to understand those. And there are things that are possibilities inside the organization, and the outside can't understand those, but the entrepreneurs can. And so the saying, if we have two sources of ideas coming into our company, we're better than if we only have one. And so that might be one way to get people to recognize that, oh, wait, there's value in both of these. And then the other part is to get everyone to have an obligation to participate on both sides. So for you as a member of the company, you have to do entrepreneurship, but you also have to have some open innovation ideas for other parts of the company, maybe. And so that way, I don't see them as a tension. I only see them as two different things I have to help with, because then I have obligation to help innovation in my company. Because that's often we let people off the hook. We let people not innovate because they say, well, that's not my job. And if she's the entrepreneur, that's her job, that's not my job. But we need everyone to be an entrepreneur, really. And we also need everyone to bring ideas that they have from outside into the system as well. So basically think of it as two sources of ideas is better than only one source of ideas. It's because of the diversity argument. Thank you for that question. That's a great question. I want to think about that some more.
That's a very interesting perspective. I've seen, as she mentioned, that open innovation and entrepreneurial programs, that they run almost on separate tracks as if they were not connected. But even to do open innovation, you would rather have people trying to solve real problems of your clients, right? So you're using outsourced ideas for in service of your strategy, and you will need entrepreneurs to do so, right? Even I'm gonna partner with an outside university or startup to solve a strategic issue of my company, right? And this is depending on somebody from inside being able to identify that type of opportunity. So for me, they should go side by side, but I've also seen it as two separate tracks inside the same company, which is not the best way to do that. Let's see if we have one more question. We have time for one more question. Here we go. Anybody?
Come on, people.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
You talked a lot about the constraints, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what about enablers? If you would tell us, in your opinion, which are the top 3 enablers of innovation that you've seen on your research and your consulting part, what would you say they are?
Okay, so but maybe I should not define it as the opposite of a constraint, but I think the things that so basically when there's the enablers, I think the enablers are I would call it emotional support. Maybe that's like culture a little bit, where there's a culture of change orientation, where there's a sense of in this company or in this organization, change is the rule, it's not the exception. I think that becomes an enabler. I think another enabler is when everyone in the organization feels the same need to address an issue. So that when people say never waste a perfectly good crisis, when there's a crisis, people are open, either they shut down or they're open to change because they're worried like what's going to happen next. And an enabler is often a crisis of sorts, because then it focuses attention, gets people to say, okay, we need to do something differently because there's, what we did brought us to this crisis, so we can't keep doing that. We have to do something else. So there's that. And I think there's this sort of broad category called resources that is there. But I would say maybe it's the resource of people having time to not be hyper focused on execution, but be able to be pulled back on, I call it hard eyes, is like when you're in doing really hard, and then soft eyes is when you pull, for me, soft eyes when I take off my glasses and the world looks a little bit different. And so giving people time to do that. When I was studying, there's a thing called Little's Law in operations. So Little's Law in operations means if you have a machine, you cannot run it at 100% capacity utilization. It will break at some point, and so you will not have it. It's usually like 70 or 80% is the most production you can get out of one machine. And so I think if we think of people that way, that people need some downtime. And yet in organizations, because we try to run lean, we basically, if someone leaves the company, we don't replace them because you're doing the job of 2 people. It seems to work. It's not a problem. We'll just let you do that. And so I think that ability to give people cognitive space to pull back, to see the opportunities, to see the problems, and to think of new ways of addressing them would be it. So I think, what did I say here? Sort of the change orientation as a company. The second one is, can't remember the second one, but the third one is giving people space to think is a huge enabler, because when people think of crazy stuff, and sometimes that crazy stuff is really interesting, but it's not, it seems wasteful because it's like, 90% of what you think of is not going to be useful. So those would be the enablers for me.
Good. And so now I think we're running towards the end of the session, and we have a few people online, and I think we're going to do a poll for the people that are online, asking them about what are their insights about this the session. I think we're going to do that through Menti. So if the people who are following us online will probably give us a few feedback about the session. And David, while we are waiting for the feedback. Are you having problems there, Thais? Or is it okay? Okay. Yeah. So I would like to make a comment about your book. I think it's a very interesting book, right? And I would like to recommend for the people who are online the book named "The Barriers for Innovation." I think it's very interesting, and to congratulate you on that. And thank you for this session. I don't know if we have the feedback for the people from the people who are online yet, or
Oh, there it goes. Okay.
let's wait a few seconds. So if we can get the feedback from the online, if people who are inside the classroom want to take a picture and make any comment, we are going to share that with you before you leave.
I think we need to wait 1 minute because the transmission have a delay, so of 1 minute, so we can use this time to answer the question.
One more question.
One more question from here, maybe.
Maybe what I can do is well, you have that up there. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing as a university. We have a new chancellor, so a new top person, and that's the person I have a relationship with. And we're trying to really help the university move innovation. And so we are, as a university, we have many, we call schools, which is like School of Medicine, School of Engineering, School of Law, School of Divinity, School of Business. And all those entities, when we were creating this thing, we call the Wondery, which is wonder plus foundry. Wonder is like ideas, and foundry is making things concrete. The question was, where do we put that? Do we put that inside of a school like engineering, or do we put it sort of outside of that? If we're in a school, the problem is then the leader of that school says, well, that's mine. And your students, your students didn't pay for this, your students don't, and that's difficult. But then also because of identity, if I'm an art student, music student, I don't go to the place where the economists hang out, right? And so there's that. But then if we're separate, then it's like, well, that's just them. That's the weird place where where the weird stuff is. And so that's a tension that we're constantly trying to balance. Is trying to say, hey, we have this place with the innovation center, and what we're really trying to do is to have all people come there to meet and to work on projects there. So we're like neutral territory. But it's really interesting and difficult to try to get people to recognize that we're doing something in our space that's interesting to them, because all they see is, well, that's the place where people learn sewing, for example. We have a sewing lab. But what happens in the sewing lab is that the nurses come over because they're working on garments that reduce stress. So if you have a shirt that reduces stress, that's really cool for a nurse, right? Because a nurse has a very stressful job, or a police officer or something like that. And so convincing the nursing people that we are doing something that actually might be meaningful to you because you have stress, that's the difficult part. Because all they see is sewing, where we see no stress reduction. And so that's sort of the being articulate about what we're trying to offer them is a difficult thing.
It's a way to break the bubbles, right? Or the silos, which are sometimes very hard to break. Yeah. Really,
especially when the silo is a machine. When you have this machine, it's just producing PhDs or producing MBAs or producing whatever. Then for them, it's like, well, we want to be efficient with that, and then I can do my research. And so for us as a research university, that's one of the difficulties of getting people to slow down. Like I said before, take some space to think, oh, why would they do that? That might be interesting to us. Oh, I see. And then, then the possibilities emerge.
Good. So are we finished? Let's see what we have.
Let's see the results.
Wow.
Good. Many takeaways about culture, time to think, relationships, adoption, choices about adaptive or radical, depending on the company, right?
Yes.
Cool.
Good.
Yeah. And we also have
lots of awesome. Wait, you didn't say lots of awesome.
a lot. Yeah. Thanks God, right? Really good. So David, let me thank you one more time for the session. Hopefully we can connect our innovation hubs. So this is one of the main purposes. There's a lot of people here that are leading innovation hubs within their companies, their schools, and the secondary objective of the seminar is to build a bigger network of connections and expanding the ecosystem of the Brazilian innovation hub. So hopefully we can connect with your Vanderbilt innovation
Absolutely,
hub.
yes. We're trying to build our network also. We're starting in the city, but I think the more broad network, I would love to do that. And we do already have existing relationships with Brazil. So I think we can begin to link some of that up. That would be great. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. And let's keep in touch, right? We'll connect everybody afterwards with a summary of the seminar.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate that. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, David.
Bye-bye.